Now, first of all, what we have learned in all of our classes, Thursday night, Ethics and Values in War, and Tuesday night, Navi, and even from a little bit Sunday, Week in Review, but primarily from Navi and Milchama, War, both of which I teach not only out of a text, but I throw in a lot of halacha and minhag customs and the way we practice. We have learned a lot about Jewish attitudes towards sex. And we have learned that everything's very, very complicated or complex. Not as simple as the way it was taught to children and in the popular worldview. For example, as a boy in elementary school yeshiva, nobody ever stops to ask, how is it that Abraham is married to Sarah and then she can't have a child? So she says, have a child. How did the Rebbe explain? The Rebbe would say, we didn't know from sex. It was 1960s. Television did not have the garbage they now have. And we were protected more. Obviously, they were protected even more in the 30s and 40s. But children were still being protected, even though less so. And so we didn't really understand certain things. And for people to say, well, didn't you talk about it? No, not in you. If you were a yeshiva kid, an Orthodox family, Orthodox neighborhood, we didn't talk about this stuff. We didn't know from this stuff. Until later, okay, by high school we knew. But in 7-year-old second grader, third grader, it wasn't like today. So nobody would ask the Rebbe if Avraham couldn't have a baby, because the Rebbe would say, Avraham couldn't have a baby with Sarah, so he had a baby with Hagar. And that was it. And nobody stopped to say, how do you have a baby with Hagar? And how did that, who gave him permission? And what do you mean Sarah said he could? Nobody asked. That's what happened. And so Yaakov is supposed to marry Leah, Rachel, and there's Leah, and it wasn't papered over. It was stated in such a way that no one perceived as anything to paper over. It was going to be Rachel, and Lavan changed them, and so Yaakov ended up marrying Leah first. And nobody stopped and said, what do you mean married her? They had a chuppah in the... Nobody asked. And so the next thing you know, he's married to Rachel also. And Rachel couldn't have a baby, so she said, go ahead and get married to Bilhah. Was it a marriage? Was it a concubine situation? He got married to Bilhah. And then Leah saw that he was having a baby or two with Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. So Leah said, have a baby go ahead, get married to Zilpah. And that's where Gad and Asher came from. And nobody asked questions. And nothing seemed inappropriate. Even the book of Esther. When you're a kid, you're growing up, there was a beauty contest, and Esther ended up, and she was the king, and she saved the Jews, and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of these subjects didn't come up, but we grow older, and you learn more, and you start asking the Rebbe in high school, how did she do that? How could she do that? Like now that we understand what happened with King Achashverosh, Ahasuerus, and Esther, like we understand why he did it. How did she go along with it? And, the Rebbes would tiptoe through the tulips and explain that, her life was on the line, and that was a good enough explanation for them. But if you've been learning with me, and I don't go out of my way to get into this subject, but you can't avoid that Avner, the chief of staff of King Saul's army, after King Saul died in battle, and Ishbosheth, his son, took over and continued with Avner. At some point, there was something about Ishbosheth accusing Avner of being intimate with the lady who was the concubine of the father Saul. Saul was gone. The concubine was there. Was Ishbosheth with the concubine? Was Avner with the concubine, which led Avner to be so outraged that he went over to David's side, and we learned all of that? It's like, how's that possible? And we've been learning about the concept of concubine. What do you mean they weren't married and they did that? And it's allowed? How could that be allowed? And we've been learning about King David. So first of all, we learned that what he did in the time of Bathsheba, as sinful as it was on one level, and we've learned that in such great detail, No time to talk about it now, and it would not be fair to you to go back over what we've learned so much detail on Tuesday nights. But we learned that technically under halakha, he was allowed to be intimate with Bathsheba. And that wasn't really the sin. Other things, we learned it. But Bathsheba, that was not adultery. And we see that in the end, he remained with Bathsheba. And the next child she had was Solomon, Shlomo, who becomes the king, the famous successor of King David. And if that had not been the case, had that been adultery, under halakha, if I haven't mentioned it earlier, pretty sure I have, if there's a proper marriage, man and a woman, and then there's adultery, which is a married woman with another man, in which case the woman has committed adultery, and the man that's been with that married woman is also sin of adultery. It's not only the woman gets punished, both get punished. But in a case of adultery, as soon as it becomes known, the husband has to divorce the wife. The husband does not have the option of saying, I really, really love her. She made a mistake, and I forgive her. And it's never going to happen again. I know it doesn't matter. We believe the husband forgives, but doesn't have a choice. Got to get divorced. No choice. That's the halakha. It's like you're not allowed to eat pork, not allowed to drive on Shabak, except, well, even Shabbat there could be an exception, but for that there's no exception. If a woman commits adultery, is intimate with someone else, then that marriage is a divorce. End of story. We see from the David and Bathsheba that God did not require David to separate permanently from Bathsheba. He sent Natan, and Natan explained what he explained, and the story went on. And the baby died, and then they had another baby that was not only blessed, but became the king of Israel, and had God's blessings showered upon him, Solomon, Shlomo, until he went awry in certain ways. So we learned that, that was allowed. And then we learned about Amnon and Tamar. And we know how evil that was. But then afterwards, Tamar said, and we learned this, so we're not going to go into that in detail, but we learned that she said, I want to stay married. Marry me. In light of what happened, marry me. And we understand that he should have married her. What do you mean? After he did that and raped her, he should have married? Absolutely. He should have married. And the halakha says, if the woman does not want to marry the rapist, she has the right to say no way. But if she does not say no way, for whatever her reason she wants to proceed and marry, he has no way out. He has to marry if he raped. So we learned that. And then we've been learning about David with all these women that he's allowed to be with. We learned that. And we learned David with Ma'acha, the non-Jewish woman, beautiful woman at wartime, how he was intimate with her in war when she was a non-Jew. And under halakha, Torah says, marry her. She's got to convert, and she's got to shave her head and sit shiva for like 30 days or whatever. And then he married her. And he had one baby from her before all of that, from his first intimacy, the daughter Tamar, and then he had another baby afterwards, the son Avshalam. So we've been learning there's a lot of the sexual intimacy. There's a lot more than a simple red light, green light. That you're only allowed to have intimacy with your married spouse. Now, nowadays, there are many things that are different and more severe and restricted than the original times that the Torah was given, before the Torah was given. For example, Avram and Sarah, before the Torah was given. Yaakov with Rachel and Leah, before the Torah was given, so he could be married to sisters, which now would be not allowed. Although you're allowed to marry the sister of a deceased wife. If the wife dies, person is allowed to marry the surviving sister. If the two sisters are alive, not allowed to marry both. If a person divorces the first sister, but she's still not allowed to marry the next sister, even though it's not a bigamy. Only if the sister died, then you're allowed, it's even considered very righteous to marry the surviving sister. Ariel Sharon married his deceased wife. She died, I believe, in a car accident. He married her sister, and it was considered a righteous deed. No, it wasn't something you would have tongue wagging. The thought was an aunt would be more loving to the children instead of having like a story like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, where the evil godmother or the evil stepmother. So we've been learning about that. We've been learning about concubines. So what we have learned is that under raw halacha, raw in the sense of not yet fully developed beyond the letter of the law, in Torah times, and then the Torah was given, and concubines were allowed. And for those who remember the classes we had in Sefer Shoftim, Book of Judges, many concubines in those stories, and what was going on with Samson and Delilah, and all kinds of stuff. And then we come into what we're learning now in Navi. So there's all of that. But you were allowed to certainly have more than one wife at a time, yet we know nowadays not. So that's a very well-known example of a matter of sexual intimacy that all of us know something forbidden now, permitted then, to have more than one wife. Now absolutely forbidden since 1,000 years ago in the Gezerah decree of Rabbeinu Gershom, Me'or Hagalah, Rabbeinu Gershom, the light of the exile. But he was the light of the exile and the chief rabbi and halachic giant of Ashkenazic Jewry, the Jews of England and France and Germany. We weren't even yet in Poland and Russia. Ashkenazic Jewry then were primarily England, France, and Germany. In fact, Germany, in those days, the Hebrew word for Germany was Ashkenaz. Francis, Tsarfat, and England, I don't know what we were, it was in Anglia even then, I don't know. We weren't yet even in Russian Poland. But among the Sephardim, the rulings of Rabbeinu Gershom did not apply. So they continued to have multiple wives if they could afford it. And that continued until the state of Israel. You see, Jews of Ashkenaz were living under the Christians. We were in Christian society. So Christians had monogamy. And therefore, any people that went beyond monogamy subjected themselves to getting killed. As we know in American history, what happened to the Mormons, like in New York and Chicago, where Christians were killing them left and right. So the Mormons had to get out of Dodge and find somewhere that no one was living. So they ended up in Salt Lake City, Utah, felt that Salt Lake, the Great Salt Lake reminded them of the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, and they felt it was God's will that they end up in Utah. And so it was safer for them. There weren't many Christians in Utah to kill them. And Utah, for the longest time, had unique, still does in some ways, unique marriage laws because of that. So, but they got killed all over the place. So Rabbeinu Gershom, for Jews living under Christianity, it was also practical, beyond morality, not to have more than one wife, because that was perceived by Christians who have a very interesting take on sex. The Christian take on sex is very, very different from the Jewish take on sex. Because in Judaism, sex is a good thing, within the rules. But sex is a good thing. Sex is not a concession. Sex is a requirement. When God created human beings, the sex drive was deliberate, not to bring humans down and make them aware that they're animalistic, but it was God's blessing to help bond a husband and wife, to motivate people to marry and stay married. And those who are married know that bonding, how that really bonds a couple. And beyond that, to procreate and have children. and to procreate in an orderly fashion so that the procreated know what tribe they are. Because under the laws of intimacy, you know who your father is, unlike other people's where they don't know who their fathers are. So in Judaism, the attitude of sex is it's a good thing, that it's God's blessing, and it brings man and wife together. It has to be controlled. Just as when you eat, if you eat sugar, too much sugar, sugar is a good thing. But if you eat too much sugar, you end up with diabetes and God knows what. And fat, a little bit of fat makes the meat taste better. It's a good thing. But if you don't control it, you run into cholesterol and all kinds of stuff. And so on and so forth. Whether we're talking about eating or any good thing, you have to control it. And Christianity is a bad thing. It's original sin. It's because of Adam and Eve and the apple and all of this stuff. Sex is an evil thing. If you want to be righteous in Christianity, the original Christianity is Catholicism until around the 1500s and Martin Luther. But for the first 1,500 years, Christianity, all it was basically was Catholicism. By the way, Mazel Tov, they just got a pope today. He was born in America. First time they've ever had a pope born in America, although he ended up moving down to South America. And they say, we'll find out. They say he might be a little friendlier to Jews than the last one. We'll see. Normally, the bottom line is what the bottom line is. Regardless, in Catholicism, which was the original Christianity for 1,500 years, if you really want to be righteous, then you marry God, a priest, no sex. No sex. And we know from the news what ends up happening when an effort is defiant of the natural order. And then for women, there's, what kind of sex do they have? None. So likewise, the idea is that righteousness is no sex. Judaism doesn't work that way. If a rabbi would apply for a job and not be married, any self-respecting shul would not hire him. Why isn't the rabbi married? All right, the rabbi recently, God forbid, was widowed. Maybe they'll accept that. But a rabbi is like 40, 50 years old, never married. No Orthodox shul would hire him. No way. Reform, conservative, nachbasser, even better. Maybe he's homosexual. Maybe she's lesbian. Maybe he's married to a homosexual. So we can hire the rabbi and we'll have the Rebbitzin as a homosexual. So who knows what goes on with Reform and conservative? That's not Judaism. But Orthodox, they want to know right away about the wife. It's a given, the wife. We want to know that the wife is the wife we have in mind. I remember when I applied in Irvine at Beth Jacob, step one was they interviewed me. Now I have to bring Ellen Zichron Levracha. And what they put Ellen through was like the Spanish Inquisition. I was going to actually quit before I took the job. Somewhere halfway through, I took a quick break with Ellen. I said, do you want to go home right now? And let's just go home and screw this. And she said, no, this means a lot to you, Dove. I think I can handle it. And so be it. It's a given that it's going to be a rabbi. Now they want to have the Rebbitzin they want. Most shuls would never do that. But they certainly expect a Rebbitzin. And it's not just to get 2 employees on one salary. It's that a rabbi is married. Rabbi has children. God forbid the rabbi is married, has no children. There'll be a quiet, gentle question. Why? And if they were not blessed with the ability to have that usually would not hurt a rabbi's opportunity to be hired. But if the rabbi would say, we decided we're not having no children because there's overpopulation in India and Gaza, he's not going to get hired. Judaism, sex is a good thing. Every shul has a mikveh, or should have a mikveh, or the neighborhood have a mikveh. And everybody knows a mikveh is there for one reason. The mikveh is not primarily there for men to go on Friday, for Rabbi Nachman people to go on Friday. The mikveh is there to facilitate marital relations. That's the whole reason they have a mikveh. Everyone knows it. Again, we're a delicate people. Tonight I'm using the word sex because there's a lot of material. I want to get through it. There are a lot of people that I just want to be clear what I'm talking about. But normally you're with me in my classes, and I don't just bandy that word around a lot. I use the word intimacy. I use the word being private, or I don't normally even use that word. Orthodox Judaism, we're modest about that subject. We don't tell dirty jokes. An Orthodox Jew with the yarmulke telling dirty jokes, it really raises eyebrows. It's just not done. Maybe someone's a good friend with someone else from college, and 30 years ago they get together without the wives. I got to tell you, and I don't think it's only because I'm a rabbi, even when I practiced law, Orthodox Jews don't tell dirty jokes. There's an occasional dirty joke that comes out, and usually the kind of person that tells it, it's like, yeah, from him, unbelievable. But from him, I can imagine he would say a joke like that. But there's a modesty with sex, but it's a good thing. It's a public thing. There's a mikveh. They're having sex. They don't build a mikveh for a priest and a nun or a Jewish rabbi to be not married, or just to go Friday before Shabbos. And so it's a different attitude in Christianity. The priest and the nun, that's the best. If you're not strong enough, so you give in to sin. And that's how it's regarded, as sin. When you're on Yom Kippur, nobody is asking God to forgive them for being physically intimate with their spouse. If, God forbid, there was inappropriate activity with prostitution, adultery, who knows what. But no one is thinking that on Yom Kippur I'm embarrassed and I'm asking you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem no begad no gazal, that I was intimate with my spouse. Of course not. In fact, it shouldn't even be used as a weapon. It's considered a good thing. It brings people together. Sometimes people, for any of a number of good reasons, end up not married. They were going to be married, they were involved, and one of the two people tied the other one up for 10 years waiting and then breaks it off, or there's this or there's that. These things happen. But that's different from nowadays, the 30-year-olds and the 40-year-olds who are just in no rush to get married. That's different. In my day, and it wasn't that long ago, it was thoroughly appropriate to get married in your 20s. There were people who got married at 18 and 19. Already the matchmakers got started. And not only the Haredim, but already modern Orthodox. You would get married. And I got married at the end of college. And it's very common. All my friends were getting married. And now you meet Orthodox kids in their 30s, like in Manhattan, parts of LA. There's like whole communities. Like there's like in Manhattan, there'll be certain shuls. Modern Orthodox shuls are known. That's a shul that attracts a lot of like 30s in singles in their 30s. And it's a culture. Haven't met the right one. Now, again, there are cases where someone has not met the right one. And I can tell you from my first marriage, better not to ever marry than to have married the wrong one. At least that's my feeling. I don't know if that's a perfect halachic statement, but that's my experience. But after my divorce, it's not like, I'm not going to do that again. I went right away to try to find a wife. And Baruch Hashem, I found a wife right away, who turned out to be a great blessing. And then I found another wife when my wife passed away. I found another wife right away, and Baruch Hashem, another great blessing. And so, but that's the halacha. By contrast, with the Christian world, there's guilt and it's sin and original sin, and therefore, like, so how is Jesus born? Jesus is central to the Christian theology. And we respect Christians who truly believe devoutly in their faith. Absolutely. How is Jesus born? If sex is such a sin, Rabbi, you're saying it's so dirty in their minds. So how was he born? He's an immaculate conception. It has to be an immaculate conception. And I'm not criticizing it for those of our Christian class attendees, both live and on YouTube. It's another theology, no criticism. But that's why that theology works that way. It has to be an immaculate conception. I mean, you did have Joseph, It's like no one necessarily would be, it's not, if it had been Joseph and Mary, it's not like people would necessarily say Mary was lacking in some moral, but it couldn't have been Joseph because there had to be immaculate because sex is dirty and sex is a sin. So it couldn't be that God's only son, according to that theology, would have been born through something dirty. Whereas in Judaism, name me a rabbi. The greatest rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, I don't know, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, modern era, they all were married through fathers and mothers. They were all born through fathers and mothers. Absolutely. And so this is all part of an important intro to where we're going for the next few weeks, what is referred to as honeypot. Now, Denise told me that honeypot sometimes has one meaning, but it also is used very regularly, matter-of-factly, to refer to a military strategy in which you send usually a woman, sometimes a man, to have sex with a target, to convince a target that the agent, the secret agent, actually is in love and uses sex to win the trust and confidence of the target in order to get important information or other stuff. This is known as honeypot strategy. And there are articles about it if you go online, and I'm going to talk about it from the Tanakh all the way up to now. I'm going to focus on 4 particular examples because I don't want to take the subject longer than it has to, but I certainly want to treat it very seriously and very thoroughly as a serious academic discipline. So our 3 focuses are going to be, number 1, the story of Yael and Sisera. It centers around chapter 4 of the book of Judges, Shoftim. And I'm not going to take a lot of time telling you about it. We're going to learn it. What will culminate from that is that Sisera is a general set on destroying the Israeli people, the Jewish people, in our homeland, where we are indigenous. And there's terrible fight, terrible war, and a good result. We gained the upper hand in war, and he flees from the battlefield, and a lady named Yael takes him into her home. He needs to hide from his pursuers in the Israeli army, the army of Israel. Let's call it the army of Israel, because it's biblical times. And so he's fleeing from someone named Barak, and the Jewish general Barak, who was a bit incomplete in terms of courage, and therefore the true hero of that entire historic episode was a woman, a different woman, the prophet Devorah, prophetess Devorah Hanaviah. So Devorah, the prophet, one of the few cases of a woman in the Bible who was at the status spiritually of a judge of Israel. And by judge, I don't mean like a judge in the courts, but a Shoftim judge, a once in a generation prophet who judged the people. So Devorah, and she instructed Barak, the general. There's a discussion among the rabbis, was Barak her husband? And she instructed him to lead the people in war against Sisera. And he said, I won't do it unless you come with me. And he wasn't doing it it wasn't like romantic. He needed her for courage. So the rabbis tell us because he did not act like a complete man and asked a woman to give him the courage. Therefore, the hero of the story who took down the enemies of Israel were women. Devorah the prophet and Yael. And as he was fleeing the scene, and we had the upper hand in trying to kill him, he took refuge with this woman. And there's a great debate, and we're going to learn it in the text. Did she actually have sex with him? Or did she lure him by promising sex and giving him stuff to have to fall asleep just before they had sex? Or did they have sex? But either way, she used sex, not just sexy, not just that she was good looking, and used that to draw him in, but specifically used the lure of sex, sexual intercourse, to kill him. That's honeypot strategy. We're going to learn that. And the rabbis look upon that as the original foundational source of how in Torah law, sometimes that's a good thing, that's allowed. And that's why I began class today with the foundation of, because it's like a shocker. So you're allowed to do that, like it's a good thing. So I wanted to remind you at the outset, and for those that are here but don't attend Tuesday night, and those that catch us on YouTube and haven't attended prior classes, that there's nothing all that extraordinary that in biblical times, the sexual engagement under certain circumstances would be perfectly okay. And it wouldn't even raise the slightest eyebrow of immorality in the context of what I've explained till now. Again, we would be horribly misunderstanding if we said, well, based on all that, I guess it's okay now. No, Judaism has evolved and certain things have changed more strictly for any number of reasons that we don't have time for now. So we were allowed to have more than one wife at a time, and now we're not allowed to. And since 1948 in the state of Israel, neither are Sephardim. No one's allowed to have more than one wife anymore. And if they would do it, they would be forced by Bet Din, or they would be excommunicated. It's just not allowed. But it was allowed in the Torah. Yeah, but it's not allowed now. How could that be? It was allowed then, not now? That's right. There's a lot of things like that. Reform Judaism likes to say that all of Orthodox Judaism stopped in 1500s with the codifying of the Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Yosef Karo. And since 1550, in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, adding the Ashkenazic overlay to the Shulchan Aruch, Orthodoxy has not stepped forward for the last 500 years. And Reform doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're wrong. Because Orthodoxy continues to evolve for the last 500 years. We've learned a lot about that, and we don't have time for that again now. But part of that evolution, in some ways, there are greater leniencies. In some ways, there are greater strictures. So now things that once were allowed can't have more than one wife at a time, and can't go around with concubines now, even though great tzaddikim, righteous people in the Bible had concubines. Concubines are forbidden under a decree known as Nashkaz. Not going to go into all of that now. It's 4 Hebrew letters. It's the Nun, Shin, Gimel, Zayin, stands for Nida, Shifcha, Goya, Zona. It's a whole nother story. Things that are forbidden now. But important to understand in biblical times, the rabbis, looking at what Yael did, regard her as having been one of the most righteous. It's a nice name to give a Jewish girl. It's not like you're naming a Jewish girl for a whore. You're naming a Jewish girl for a tzedekah, for a righteous woman in the Bible. And there are many. Israel, Yael is a very popular name, modern Israel. The second of the 4 is going to be Esther. And we know about Esther in the book of Esther. The Purim story, won't need to devote a lot of time to telling you that story. We'll talk about it because she saved the Jewish people by sleeping with King Ahasuerus. Now, to some degree, she differs from Yael because Yael did it voluntarily. Esther really, she did not necessarily want to go to the beauty contest. She was forced against her will, compelled. and she was selected by Achashverosh, and she had no choice. But on the other hand, in chapter 4 of Megillat Esther, when Mordechai tells her, you've got to do something, the people are going to be exterminated, only you can save the Jews, it seems. Although if you don't do it, maybe God will send salvation from somewhere else and your family will be destroyed. But in the first instance, it seems God put you in this position as the queen to save the people. So even though she became queen by coercion, forced to attend the beauty contest and forced to be sexually intimate as part of the test by the king and forced to live under the king's palace roof and in his bed, there is a voluntary element in chapter 4 where she, having been told that by Mordechai, decides to use the sexual lure. She hasn't been seen by the king for 30 days. She points out to Mordechai that if the king doesn't call for you, you can't just go up to the king uninvited. You're executed unless he extends the royal scepter, the golden scepter. And I haven't been called by him for 30 days. And if I show up uninvited, I'm executed unless he extends that scepter. And we've even saw in our class that movie clip that's not exactly accurate, but very, very moving. It gives a feeling of that. And nevertheless, she used the sexual lure, persuaded by Mordechai to go to the king, and she got the king, and that saved the Jewish people. And Esther is a good guy and one of the righteous in Jewish history in the Bible. So we're going to learn about those two and how it came to be that the rabbis are so okay with it. And then we move ahead, and there are two cases I'm going to mention that we're going to go into a little. It's not going to be as deep halacha because there's very little. There's some halacha that's been written about it. Rabbis have commented on it because they were like public events, specifically one, the Mordechai Vanunu case. Mordechai Vanunu was a dirtbag, a Israeli who got angry at Israel for whatever reason. I think he was a leftist communist, but whatever he was politically, he deserted. There are a lot of Israelis who really hate Israel. There are a lot of Jews who hate Judaism. Bernie Sanders, George Soros, Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's was just on Tucker Carlson about 3 days ago, had a 1-hour interview with Tucker Carlson where he talked about that he doesn't believe in any God, but the closest he comes is that he loves Jesus. So the only thing that holds him back from being a pure Christian is he doesn't believe Jesus is divine. But other than that, he doesn't believe in any God, but he's Tucker Carlson's kind of Jew. And Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry. There are a lot of Jews that hate Judaism, even if they don't hate Jews. In Israel proper, on Kaplan Square, there are people in the Meretz party now, it's Labor Party, they're now called the Democrats, and they hate Judaism. There are people in Tel Aviv 2 years ago, a month before October 7th, there are some Orthodox rabbis who believe this led to to October 7th. There was an outdoor Ne'ilah service at the end of Yom Kippur. Every year, an Orthodox group holds an outdoor prayer service in a part of Tel Aviv to mark the end of Yom Kippur. And a bunch of Israeli leftists in Tel Aviv attacked the outdoor service physically. They actually physically attacked people who were davening. You would expect that from Hitler and from Martin Bormann and Adolf Eichmann and Julius Streicher and Stalin, not Putin, but Stalin. Those are Jews in Israel. There will be no Jewish prayer in the streets of Tel Aviv. That's how much they hate Judaism. So there are Jews that hate Judaism in Israel. It's hard to believe. But it's not that hard to believe. Are you an American? There are a lot of Americans that hate America. Just catch one of these demonstrations yesterday in Colombia. in the Columbia Library. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but they chant death to America, death to Israel. They're not just Americans who hate Jews in Israel. L'Kavod America, in honor of America, first America. Death to America, death to Israel. That's Americans. Assuming at least some of them are Americans, 3/4 of them are probably here on visas from Qatar and Kuwait. And thank God for Rubio and more than that, Trump, for at least on that subject, even if you don't agree with most of Trump's stuff. So there are Jews that hate Israel, and Mordechai Vanunu is one of them. Now, it happened to be that Mordechai Vanunu was working on Israel's top secret nuclear weapons program. Now, everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. Certain countries are open about it, and everybody knows those. The United States, England, France, Germany, India, and Pakistan, I believe. So there's about 6 or 7 countries who have nuclear weapons, all of whom can wipe out the world, or a good chunk of it. And everybody knows about it. And people have learned since the nuclear crisis of 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev, people have learned to sleep every night under the theory of MAD, mutual assured destruction, that they'll never do it to us because then we'll do it to them. Oh, I left out North Korea. So why is everybody so upset about Iran if there are so many like that? If there's already 7 or 8, including places like North Korea, China, and Russia. First of all, because Iran is even crazier. Because with Iran, even more than North Korea, the guy's crazy. He's like mamish crazy. And Putin's not crazy. Stalin might have been. And Xi in China, they're not crazy. But they're just almost as dangerous. The guy in North Korea is more dangerous because he's crazy. But Iran is the worst of all if they ever get it, because that's religious crazy. So religious crazy, like crazy, most people who are crazy also don't want to get killed. But religious crazy, they don't care if they get killed as long as it's a righteous war, because they're going up to the 72 virgins. So you don't want them to get it. The one country that is the interesting question mark is Israel. Everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons, except Israel won't say so. In fact, everybody knows it's like based in Dimona, even though where it is. But Israel won't say so. And the Arabs kind of don't say so either. Once in a while they say it, but usually they don't say so. Everybody likes to act. As long as we don't say they have weapons, they won't admit they have weapons, and it won't be part of any discussions. It's like nobody would imagine that Israel would get involved with nuclear weapons to deal with Gaza. So Hamas could wipe out 1,200 people. There's no concern about nuclear weapons because Israel won't admit they have nuclear weapons, and everybody acts that way. So Mordechai Vanunu, who worked in Dimona on Israel's nuclear weapon stuff, and by the way, Israel doesn't just have one weapon. The assumption is that if Israel goes down, it's going to be Samson, like in the Bible, everyone's coming down. And Vanunu stole secret plans and got out of Israel and went to England, I believe. And he met with, like, I don't remember, was it Times of London or one of those papers, the Telegraph or the Mirror? I don't know which one. He met with one of the leading British papers, showed them the plans, and was going to start telling them the entire story of Israel's nuclear weapon system. How it got started, who was involved with what they have, where it is, what's doing, what the plans are. And the Mossad, Israel's CIA, determined we got to stop this guy. And the question is, how are you going to stop him? If he was in Israel, that's easy. Let's say he's in England. Let's say how do you stop him? Now you're getting into the kind of stuff the Mossad, like when they want to get Eichmann out of Argentina. You're not allowed to do that. Not only maybe Israel law allows it, but Argentina did not allow No country allows another country to come into their country to execute their justice. That's really a violation of international law that you can't really argue with. You can violate it if you have to, but you got to admit you had no right to do it. Sometimes people violate laws to save their lives. But so the question is, how are we going to stop Vanunu? Because I think it was in England, but it might have been Italy even. I don't know, one of those, England, Italy, or France. And the Mossad sent the woman to become his girlfriend. And they prepared her, blah, 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 blah. And she went to that country in Europe, and she just happened to bump into him at an airport or something. And I don't know whether she dropped a handkerchief and he picked up the handkerchief, or whether she slipped and he picked her up, or whether she bumped into him. But they just happened to meet. And next thing you knew, they had a cup of coffee. And the next thing you knew, they had another cup of coffee. And then they had sex, boyfriend, girlfriend. It's coming back to me. I didn't prepare the whole story, but I think this is in England, but I don't quote me on the countries. And it seems to me that now that they're having sex regularly and the boyfriend, girlfriend, that she suggested, why don't we go somewhere romantic like Italy? And they flew to Italy, and the Mossad was waiting at the airport. And they weren't waiting there with pizza, but with a very large briefcase, a trunk. And if I got the fact, I'll get the facts. Right now, I want to have Torah facts and halacha facts. That I want to be sure I tell you right. These stories I can look up next time. If I understand correctly, they showed up with a trunk, or at the carousel or something with the luggage, and they basically knocked him out, stuffed him into the trunk, and flew him back for free to Israel. And I think he's still in prison. It's like 30 years now. And oh my God, Italy and everybody was screaming and yelling, you violated our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. And what's Israel going to say? Yeah, we did it. Yeah, we did it. So there was a lot of, you know how these things are. There's a lot of noise for 6 months, and then something worse happens somewhere and everybody forgets. So they're so angry at Israel. Next thing you know, some Arab blows himself up at a concert in Italy or in England, and they're more concerned about that. End of story. So the question became, there was actually a lot of rabbinic literature. Dr. Goslan actually sent me something. I had just found it a few days earlier myself, but Dr. Goslan had sent me a 15-page halachic treatise that was written by a rabbi in Gush Etzion, treating from what happened with Yael and Queen Esther to the modern period. Was Mossad allowed to do that? Are you allowed to send a woman to just go and have a lot of sex with a guy, Honeypot, for a military purpose, strategy, in this case to extricate him from a foreign country and bring him back, lock him up, throw out the keys, and by the time he ever goes free, 30 years later, the nuclear secrets he knew then will have no value today. So that was one. And the other one I'm going to mention is Avshalam Raviv. And let's get him in our list, 3-4 minutes. I mentioned this on a Sunday 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to put a lot more into it. I'm going to devote a lot more time to this for our Sunday classes on what's going on around the world, American Jews, Israel. Our group, Tuesday night Navi, Thursday night Halacha, Sunday, our group can handle the truth. And our group, the students have been part of our class. There's millions of Jews, so we've been able to attract one community of those Jews who can handle the truth. And the truth is that for the last number of years, last 20 years or so, Israel has been pocked, P-O-C-K, pocked by the toxicity of a deep state, a left-wing deep state, just like America. Not just a swamp. It took Trump to bring out what's going on in America. When he got elected in 2016, he thought he's going to drain the swamp. He thought it was a swamp. He himself had no idea, nor did all of his tens of thousands of followers who would chant, drain the swamp, drain. Nobody realized how deep the deep state in America is, how much left-wing corruption there is at the very rotten core of America. No one knew. And people couldn't quite initially process it. The FBI is not left-wing. The FBI, they have a 10 most wanted list. They're our greatest heroes. And it took the first term. And initially, like Sean Hannity would say, it's not the rank and file of the FBI. It's only Peter Strzok and Lisa Payne and McCabe. But it's not the. And after 4 years, people began to see there's a rot in the FBI. Comey, and even that next guy that finished that Trump named, he had no idea that even the successor of Comey was rot. And finally, they brought in Kash Patel, and we're going to find out a lot in the next 4 years. And the same thing with the other departments, the rot. We're now seeing the rot in the judiciary, that there's no justice. There is justice, but not a lot. And the people can elect a political line, and they don't get what they pay, what they elected. That people actually are sold on the bill of goods, that it is a democracy, and the country may shift very left-wing if that's what the people want, or very right-wing if that's what the people want. Nobody was ever told that regardless of how you vote, there is an internal deep state that won't let you get what you voted for. So you elect Trump based on a series of promises. The guy, maybe they're bad promises, but that's what he promised, and that's what his voters asked for. So he goes forward, and the deep state stops each thing one at a time. And we're going to find out in the next 2 years whether there's any way to deal with this. But right now, and so it's there, and there's academia. So when you send your kids to college, what a great honor. You're sending your kids to Harvard and Columbia, Princeton. So they will have an advantage in all of life. Yale, they will have a step up for the rest of their lives. It'll cost a lot of money, but they'll get an education. And now it turns out that's a deep state, that 80, 90% of the professors at all of these places are radical extreme leftists. And kids are sent and are destroyed and come out with one viewpoint. And 50% of the students aren't even American, but they're foreign students who are brought in with radical agendas from anti-American countries, because the foreign students pay full tuition. If you bring in Americans, you got to give them major scholarships, because it's $60,000, $80,000 a year, even more with dorm and books and food plan. So 4 years of college is $320,000. So they give tuition breaks and scholarships to the Americans, and half of the student body are from China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, really extreme Kuwait, extreme Arab countries, China, where they pay full freight. And that's what supports. So a lot of us didn't realize it. And the professors are from there. So you send a child to go, and remember, take Middle East courses. So when you're at Columbia, you could learn more about Israel. And you're signing up for Khalidi, for these other people who are not only Jew haters, but they're poison. So it turns out, and the next 4 years, one of two things is going to happen. Trump and his people are either going to bring in an equilibrium and get out this deep state, or it's going to be permanent. And if it's permanent, we don't have to devote the rest of this time now. Maybe America will be good and just always left wing, or we'll see what happens. Why did I go into that on a class of Honeypot? Because that's what's going on in Israel. And the same exact thing We don't hear about it. Number one, it's not the job of the New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, NBC, ABC, public television, MSNBC. It's not their job to report on the deep state in Israel. Maybe if the deep state were right wing, maybe they would. But since the deep state is left wing, which they are, they're not out to report on something that esoteric. They report on the Gaza war and genocide and famine and all these lies. They don't report on the deep state. And because Israel's deep state is the same as America's, so Israel's newspapers are left wing, except for one or two papers, like Yisrael Hayom. But Ma'ariv is deep state left. Yediot Achronot is deep state left. All the TV stations, 11 and 12, Keshet 12, and Reshet 13, they're all deep state left. Even worse than America, all the academia, Tel Aviv University, Haifa University, Ben Gurion University, is all deep state left. And the court system, even up to the Supreme Court, is deep state left, as it was in America until Trump turned around the court by naming Gorsuch and Barrett and of course Brett Kavanaugh. So, but Israel, they haven't had such a thing. So Israel has a deep state left, Supreme Court, media, academia, and like America, the FBI. Just as the FBI, we'll see what Kash Patel can do. Israel's FBI is the Shin Bet or Shabak, Shirut Bitachon Klali, and it's on one side. They basically sabotage justice to lock up Jews who are Orthodox in Judea, Samaria. 2 weeks ago in our Sunday class, we played for you a secret recording that was on Israeli TV of a Shin Bet guy actually telling a reporter, not knowing, he was talking to a leftist reporter, didn't know it would end up on TV, that we just go around random arresting religious nationalist people in Judea, Samaria, without evidence, without even charges. We just not just recently, for years, we just pick them up and we hold them for a week or two without charges, and then we release them, partly to harass them, and partly we question them, and you never know, something might come out. There's like really Soviet Stalin. And he referred to them as schmucks, shmokim. He actually said that in the recording. Those of you who were in our Sunday class a few weeks ago, shmokim. That we just arrest a bunch of these religious nationalist shmokim, and we keep them a week or two. And then we let them go and arrest another bunch of them. Why am I going into this? Because the last of the four things that would be part of our subunit, we'll learn about Yael and about Esther, about the halakha development of Honeypot, using the lure of sex for military strategic reasons. We'll go up to how the Mossad used the lure of sex to get Mordechai Vanunu out of Europe and back into Israel. And finally, Avshalam Raviv. Avshalam Raviv was a kippah-wearing religious nationalist who was turned into a double agent by the Shin Bet. Very recently. You've heard of him. Okay, you might not have heard. Many of you have never heard of him, but you've heard of what he accidentally caused. Because when you have a double agent on a secret spy cloak and dagger thing, once in a while it gets out of control. It is very, very possible, and I'm going to word this very carefully as we close down for the night, because I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I can't stand those. And they exist from Marjorie Taylor Greene to the people on the left who say George Bush was involved in 9/11. So I'm going to say this very, very clearly, but I'm going to document it. I'm going to back it up with indisputable evidence. The Mossad, the Shin Bet, Mossad is the CIA, not them. Maybe them too, but not them. CIA, Shabak, brought in Avshalam Raviv, a religious nationalist extremist, to turn double agent. He was the head of religious nationalist extremism At the time that Yitzhak Rabin was putting on the 1993 Oslo Accords, he led the demonstrations and the riots. It was he who stood in a mass crowd in Tel Aviv with the famous poster of Rabin dressed like Eichmann in full Nazi regalia. It was he, and it was he who handed that poster to the media so that they would put it on page one and create such an anti-Rabin craziness among the Israeli right, such that Israeli right-wing extremists would do terrible things that would turn the country against the Israeli right and towards Labor Party, that when the right wing, just like these students at Columbia, they're turning people against their cause. Certainly kids that are studying for finals in Columbia, they don't give a darn about Palestine. And they're turning people against them. And extremists often turn people against their cause. The Shin Bet worked to radicalize the Israeli right to the point that they would do things that would turn the country against them and support the 1993 Oslo Accords, which initially the majority of the country voted against. And Avshalam Raviv led the way, and one of his assignments was to be the personal handler of certain right-wing extremists and direct them to do certain crazy things. And one of the people he was assigned to handle was Yigal Amir. And he further radicalized Yigal Amir. And there is testimony that he kept saying to Yigal Amir, you don't have guts. You don't have beitzim. You talk tough, but you never do anything tough. There is testimony that he gave Yigal Amir a gun. Do something tough. Show you have guts. And it is then that pretty much most people, everybody agrees, no, he did not tell Yigal Amir to assassinate Rabin. He just told Amir, prove you're a real man. Here's a gun. And why don't you prove that you really can do something? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. 1 week ago, Channel 14 aired a 45-minute documentary by Rickless, and they have interviews from people. We're gonna go through that documentary, and why am I telling you this? Last thing for the night. Part of the Shin Bet plan for gaining Avishai Raviv acceptance as the number one leader of the extreme right wing was they sent him to marry an Orthodox Jewish right-wing girl, politically right-wing girl, who lived in Judea, Samaria, make her believe you love her, get her to marry you, have children with her, so that you are not seen as an irresponsible crazy, but a bona fide person. And as soon as Avishai Raviv completed his assignment, he divorced her and had nothing more to do with her and never did have anything emotional for her. She was sent by the Shin Bet. He was sent by the Shin Bet to marry and have sex with a woman just so that he could present himself as married with children. So is that allowed? Oh, that's not allowed. So we have a lot to learn. Thanks for being here. And we'll look for you on Sunday, Shabbat Shalom. And it's an interesting world out there. Bye-bye.